that this session is recorded, and I will be sending that out afterwards. Now, the great thing about today is I'm not going to have a big, huge PowerPoint presentation that we're going to be following along with. It's going to be mostly hands-on within the self-paced polling area of Turning Point. Now, you're going to notice I'm going to be referring to it as self-paced polling. Some of you might have heard it referred to as self-paced testing. I don't like to call it self-paced testing just because it kind of paints the picture that it can only be used in a testing scenario, when in reality, the self-paced polling option can actually be used with exams, tests, quizzes, but it can also be used with large-scale surveying. So if anybody's doing anything like a large employee engagement survey, or in the case of a school board, doing like a large, 100 or 125 question survey, whether it's to students, parents, faculty, whatever, self-paced polling can be used in that scenario as well. And just while I'm switching over to the Turning Point application, as far as self-paced polling goes, the idea behind it really is that it allows your participants to respond to a series of questions at their own speed. Now, they're going to be relying on a printed copy of the questions, so they're still going to be reading to know, what the questions and answer choices are that they're going to be picking from. But the idea is on the back end, Turning Point's gathering all that data, calculating responses. In the case of a test, it's scoring all your students automatically for you. So you're saving a ton of time sort of on the back end of things. And so what we're going to walk through today is I want to be able to show you guys, first of all, what a completed self-paced test looks like before we get ready to run it. I want to show you how to build one. And then we're going to go through the process of running it and sort of what a facilitator is going to see on the computer. And then I've also got a document camera set up here as well, so that you'll be able to see my QT keypad and sort of what's going on from a participant point of view as the test is progressing. So let's start off first having a look at what a completed list of questions would look like for a self-paced polling session. Now you're going to notice I'm running this webinar today on a Mac. The self-paced polling area of Turning Point is absolutely 100% identical on the PC as well. So if you start working on this on your PC system, you're not going to notice anything different versus what I'm going over here today. So you'll notice here right away on the dashboard, I do have my receiver plugged in and connected on channel 10, which is the channel I use here in the office myself. Now, again, just like with PowerPoint polling, the receiver does not need to be plugged in order to build your test or your list of questions. So to build our list of questions, we're going to go to our Content tab here, and I'm going to show you what a completed list looks like first, and then we'll build one. So I put one together ahead of time here called March 2015 webinar. I'm just going to edit it to show you what it looks like. So I just created a quick 10-question answer key is what they're called. And you'll notice here that mine is very, very generic. It just simply says enter question text. If I go into one of them by double clicking it, it says enter answer text. So in the big picture, self-paced polling within Turning Point, it doesn't necessarily really care what your questions are and what your answers are. All it wants to know is, firstly, how many questions you have, what kind of questions they're going to be, and then how many answer choices are going to be presented to the participants. And then in the case of an exam or a test, it's going to want to know what the correct answer is, which is what this final column is here. Now, for those of you that are hopefully familiar with the PowerPoint polling side of things, you're going to notice here on the settings panel, it looks familiar. So we've got similar options as what we have in PowerPoint polling, okay? And so this is what your final product is going to look like in terms of your answer key that Turning Point's going to use for self-paced polling to know what it's supposed to do. So that's the finished product. How do we get here? I'm just going to close out of here. To get to that point, what we want to do is we want to create a brand new content list or answer key. And what we're going to do is on our Content tab, we're going to click the content dropdown. We're going to go to new, and we're going to create a question list. Step number one is we're going to give it a name. So if this is for a particular quiz, test, exam, or a particular employee engagement survey, you're going to want to put that in the name so that the day of, it's an easy thing for you to reference. So let's just say we're going to do an employee engagement survey. You can just hit save and start right into it. Now, if we expand this preferences area down here, it gives us some shortcuts. So if we don't do anything, we just hit save, Turning Point assumes we're going to start with question number one, and then we're going to manually add each additional question. Let's say, for example, you've got an exam with 100 questions in it. You can save yourself a ton of time by setting your total questions to 100. And what Turning Point's going to do is just simply build 100 questions straight into the question list for us. You can choose your default question type. So if all your questions are going to be multiple choice, you can set that here. Similarly, if all your questions are going to be true false, you can set that here as well, and Turning Point will use that as the default. Just because it's the default doesn't mean you cannot mix and match other question types. So if out of our 100 questions, say 75 of them were multiple choice, that's fine. And then on a question by question basis, we can manually change those other 25 to be whatever type we want. So whether that's a short answer, whether it's a matching or an essay question, we can change those on a one-off basis. Now this next bullet format option, it's a commonly looked over step. This controls what appears on the participants' devices when they answer the question. So if your paper-based copy of the survey or test that they're going to be doing is labeled in a way on the paper that says question number one, and then the answer choices are A, B, C, D, as small as it seems, make sure your bullet format matches the same type of format. So if your answer choices are listed as 1, 2, 3, 4, you can pick 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, the reason you want this to match your paper copy is because when a participant answers the question on their device, if you've got this set to be bullet formats as 1, 2, 3, 4, but your paper copy says ABC, when they hit A on their keypad, the screen is going to show them 1 because that's what the test thinks it is. So just to avoid any confusion and just more of a visual thing than anything else, make sure this bullet format matches how your answers are labeled on your paper copy. Okay, our next step down, the question font, answer font, we don't need to worry about that for our self-paced testing or self-paced polling. Number of answers, again, this is a bit of a time saver. So if all your multiple choice questions are going to have 4 answer choices, you can set it to 4. Turning Point will build it that way. If they're all going to have 5, we can set it to 5, and Turning Point's going to, by default, build it that way as well. We can also set our correct and incorrect point values. So in the scenario of a test, we can say, all right, every single question's worth 1 point. And then again, you have the ability to manually set other questions to be worth more. So if there was a numeric response style question, for example, where the participant had to solve an equation of some sort, that might be worth 5 points instead of 1, right? So we can adjust on a question by question basis if we need to. Once we've set all of this, what we're going to do is we're just going to hit save. And because I set it to 100 questions, you're going to see here that Turning Point builds this massive list of 100 multiple choice questions with 4 answer choices each. Now, if we need to make a change on a one-off basis, we could just change this drop-down. If question number 1 was going to have 5 choices, we can just do that here. You can change your question type here if we need to have something other than multiple choice. And then on a very basic level, if we're setting up a test, the only other thing that Turning Point really wants to know is what the correct answer is. And very quickly, all you have to do is if you've got your answer key on the paper copy that says, okay, this is the correct answer, all you have to do is come through here and fill in what the correct answer is to each question. So it's very, very quick as far as doing that. And that's what Turning Point's going to use to score everybody. Now, because Turning Point really at the end of the day, the question content and answer content doesn't make a big difference to it, you can just leave everything very generic, right? As enter question text, enter answer text. In the case of a self-paced survey, where it's a large scale survey with a bunch of questions and you're doing like a large audience, you may not want this to be very generic, right? Because we're not scoring people on the survey, we're collecting important data. And so if we just leave everything as enter question text, enter answer text, it's very generic. And when we look at our reports, that's what it's going to show us. So it's going to be just kind of a bunch of data, and then we're going to have to cross-reference it all with a paper copy. So in a survey scenario, or even in a test scenario, you can come into all of your questions and double click them, and we can actually put in what our question and answer content is going to be. So if this was actually my question number 1, okay, I can come in here and actually type my content in. And now what that's going to do is it's going to update my question list so that now Turning Point knows exactly what my question is, exactly what my answer choices are. And now the trade-off is when I run my reports, I get all that detail instead of just that very generic enter question, enter answer. The other thing where this can benefit you by entering all the data, it may seem like it's a duplication of work. You know, you might think, well, I've got this paper copy, and all Turning Point needs to know is what my correct answers are and how many questions there are. Well, that's all I need to do. If you take the time to fill in your question and answer content here, Turning Point will let you print a student copy of the question list that you've created, so it can generate that paper copy for the students. You can also generate a teacher copy, which is going to be a printout of everything with the correct answers, if there were any, flagged off. And then the answer key is just the question numbers 1 through 100 in this case, with what the correct answer is beside each one. So by filling in all that content, it can also let you generate those teacher and student copies of the evaluation or of the survey. So it takes a bit more time up front, but it gives you those extra capabilities. Now, generally, when I get to this point, when I'm speaking to somebody live on the phone, the question usually comes up, well, you know, in my classroom, I have 3 different versions of the exam going, right? Because I don't want eyes wandering and people copying each other. So a student can have any one of 3 possible versions of my test. How do I deal with that in Turning Point? And Turning Point has that functionality built right in. You can actually run up to, I believe it's 19 versions of the same test or same self-paced question list at the same time. So theoretically, if you had a class of, say, like a small group of, say, 15 students, each student could actually write their own unique version of the exam or of the survey. So you've got some flexibility there. Now, what you'll notice on my screen here is there's a version dropdown. Okay, this is where we can add additional versions of our exam. Now, what's going to happen is when we create an additional version, this list that I've created initially becomes what's called the master. And the idea is that every version you create is created based on the list of questions in the master. So what it's going to do when I do this is first it's going to ask us to give it a version number. So this is going to be our very first one that we've created. And it gives me a few options. I can choose to use the existing questions that I've already created, which is going to turn this list into a master, or I can choose to add them with new questions. So if I wanted to have totally different questions and totally different answers, I can do that as well. It's a lot more work because you're literally creating 3 or 4 or 5 totally different versions of the exam. So when we choose the option to add with existing questions, Turning Point is going to give you some more options. So by default, it's going to say, all right, well, I'm going to assume that you want this version to have all 100 questions, so it checks them all off. Realistically, if you wanted to have a master list of, say, 300 questions, but then for version 1, maybe you wanted to pick 100 random ones, and then version 2, you wanted to pick a totally different set of 100 questions, You can do that. That's perfectly fine using these checkboxes here. And then it gives you the option down here to randomize your question order and also to randomize your answers. So if we randomize our question order, what it's going to do is take our list of 100 questions, scramble them all up so that this has a different sequence than the master. Same thing goes if I create a second version from the master, it's going to create a different sequence for those 100 questions. If I only have this checked off, it's not going to reshuffle my answer choices. The answer choices will remain the same as far as the sequence goes on all versions of the file that we create. If I check off randomize, what it's going to do is it's going to randomly shuffle my questions as well as my answer choices. So question number 1 is going to be different on each version, and then the answer choice sequences for all those are going to be different as well. So it's up to you how much you want to kind of shuffle those around and change them. So I'm going to add a version, and it warns you that by doing this, your original becomes a master, so it lets you know. And then I'm going to add a version number 2, do the same thing, just so I've got 2 versions going on here. Okay, so now I can choose up here in my top corner, I can choose version 2, I can choose version 1, or I can also choose my master. Now the great thing is here, and we actually have had it come up with some clients in the past, where they create their master question list, and then they realize after they've done it and they're reviewing everything, oh man, on my master list, question number 2, the correct answer is not B, the correct answer should be D. All you have to do is change the correct answer here to be D, and then that will filter through all the versions you've created. On your version number 1, question number 2 might actually be question number 85 on that version. And because I shuffled my answer choices, answer B may have been shuffled to be answer number A. So when I make a change here to my master, it reflects across all my versions I've created from this master. So it's very, very quick and very, very easy to firstly identify an error that might have been made, but then also to fix it, because now we don't have to chase that error through 2 or 3 or 4 different versions of the exam, right? So it makes it very easy to correct those things. The other thing too that you might be wondering on that topic is, well, what happens if I run the test or the survey and then realize afterwards, right? A student comes to me and says, oh, you know what? I realized that the question number 3, the wrong correct answer was there. What you can do is you always have the ability to go back and edit the results from that test. So you can go in and say, no, question number 3, the answer was this, and it'll regrade all the students that answered that question. So it's very easy with a self-paced polling session to correct any mistakes or errors that may come up, okay? So we're just basically going to rinse and repeat that process for every version of the exam you want to create. So it's very easy to make those multiple versions. Once you're done with all of that, all you have to do is hit save and close, okay? And that now becomes a question list or a content list that you can load into Anywhere Polling. So that's how you're going to build your general sort of key that Turning Point's going to use to kind of understand what's going on during your self-paced polling session. Now, just like with PowerPoint polling and Anywhere Polling, you have the option to create a participant list or not create a participant list. If you're doing an exam or some sort of an evaluation, obviously you're going to want to create a participant list through your Manage tab here so that you can track the grading and scoring for each individual participant. If you are just doing a large scale survey and you're just looking for the data and you're not wanting to know how each person responded, you can just leave auto selected here, just like you would with PowerPoint polling. And all Turning Point's going to do for the self-paced session is collect the keypad ID number. It's not going to know who the person is. So it's entirely up to you whether you want the self-paced session to be anonymous or if you want it to be tracked to each individual person. So what I'm going to do, I've got a participant list that I created here ahead of time. It's just got one keypad because that's all I've got room for on my document camera. And it's really all that we need to be able to see from a participant standpoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that list here from my participants menu. And the nice thing is self-paced polling is a little pickier than PowerPoint or Anywhere polling. For those of you that have maybe used either of those two other options before, you know that you can get into PowerPoint polling without a receiver plugged in. You can also get into PowerPoint polling without a content list selected. Self-paced polling will not let you launch it if a receiver is not detected or a content list is not loaded. So it's got a few more fail-safes built in there, right? With PowerPoint polling, it's fairly easy in that rush and hustle of getting everything ready to totally forget to plug your receiver in and you realize last minute. Nice thing with self-paced polling is it is not going to let you get any further than the dashboard without a receiver plugged in. So it's kind of fail safe. You can't really, you don't have to really worry about anything going wrong or anything like that. So it's kind of nice. Down here in my content list, I've got my 2-question list that I've created. So I've got my engagement survey that I just did as an example to show you all how that works. And then I've got my 2015 webinar self-paced polling list that I created that has just those 10 questions on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to select my list, select my questions, and I'm going to hit self-paced polling. Now, the big thing to keep in mind here with self-paced polling is that it's really not geared towards the audience needing to see this, right? This console is more or less feedback for you as the person running the test and facilitating it and monitoring what's going on. And it's really, really super easy compared to PowerPoint and Anywhere polling. If you guys are comfortable with those two options, this is going to be a walk in the park as far as running this. All we're going to do when we come to the self-paced polling, it's going to show you all the participants that are on the list that we loaded. It's going to tell you the question list you selected, and it's going to tell you how many questions are on it. All we have to do is click this Accept Logins button in the top left corner of the self-paced polling window. And it's going to give us a few options. Number one is participant login. You can have it set to off, you can have it set to required, and required clear previous user ID. Now here's where you would want to use each of these options. If you have created a participant list like I had, where I manually assigned each keypad to a participant, you can leave participant login to off because the participant list is telling Turning Point who has what keypad. The scenario where you would want to use required is if you have a participant list without device IDs. So all we have is a student first name, last name, and then in the user ID column, we have their student ID number. Okay, what this is going to do is by setting it to required before the device connects to the self-paced session, it's going to prompt them to enter their user ID. And so if my user ID was, if my student ID was just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I'm going to punch that into my keypad when I'm prompted. That's going to trigger Turning Point to now search that participant list for user ID 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it's going to match up the keypad ID to my name automatically. Okay, so it's kind of like doing a real-time registration. Now the difference between these two options here, clear and default, is the default is just going to use whatever the last user ID was that was entered into the keypad. So that is not necessarily a problem if the student owns the keypad and they use it every day, right? Chances are it's their student ID that's been programmed in there from day one, so it's not really a big concern. The required and the clear previous user ID, this is what you're going to want to use, particularly if you have like a classroom set of NXT keypads or QTs, because these both work with self-paced polling, and you have a classroom set where, today one student might use the keypad and tomorrow a totally different student might use it. The last thing you want to do is tell Turning Point to use the last ID on the keypad because it's potentially not going to match up with anything in your list you're using today. So just keep that in mind. Classroom kits where they're being used by all different students all the time, you're going to want to be required and clear. If it's one where the student owns the keypad, you can do required default because it's not going to cause a problem. I'm just going to leave it to off. Our time limit, you have a few options here as well. So if you leave it on none, it's going to be a manual process of starting the test or polling session and ending the session. So it's up to you when it starts and finishes. It's kind of like polling a slide in PowerPoint. However, if you want to set it for a certain amount of time, let's just say it was a final exam and students had 2 hours to complete it. What happens is when you start the test and start the session, a 2-hour timer starts counting down in Turning Point. And as the facilitator, you'll see it right on your screen. It'll tell you exactly where it's sitting. When it hits the end of that 2-hour time limit, it closes the test and captures the data wherever the students have made it to. So it's just like doing a 2-hour time limit on a paper copy that you would normally do and then collecting them manually. It does the same thing. At the end of the time, it shuts it down and collects what they've done. You can also set a specific end time. So if the test starts at 2 and it ends at 4 p.m. exactly, you can tell it to end at 4 p.m. and same thing, 4 o'clock hits, closes the test, gathers what everybody's done automatically. So it's up to you how you want that to run. I'm just going to leave it on none. And then there's a completed test message. By default, it does nothing. It doesn't show anything on the keypad. However, if you want, you can actually have it feed back the grade to the student immediately. So if it's an exam or a test, the student can know right away when they're done the test on their keypad how they scored. So there's no more of that. When are we going to get our grades? Oh, you'll get them next week or next class. It's immediate. Okay. You can also do a custom message. The one thing you cannot do is a custom message based on the grade people fall within. We've had that question asked, but it's a generic custom message that goes out to everybody. So if it was like a midterm before March break or something, or before reading week, you could just have a message go out to everybody when they finish. It says, have a great reading week. See you on the 25th or whenever everybody's going to be back. So it's up to you. You can have it do nothing, show a grade, or show a custom message. I'm going to hit OK. And at this point now, before you actually start the test by hitting the Start Polling button, students can actually start connecting to it. So what I can do is I'm just going to hit a button on my keypad here. Let's move this a little bit. And you'll see the keypad starts doing a couple of things. First, it says welcome. Then it does a battery check. So it's going to make sure that based on the number of questions in the question list, the keypad's going to have enough battery power to kind of make it through the whole thing. Let's give it a second here. And my document camera froze up a little bit here. Just give me 1 second. All right, there we go. Let's give this another try. So it's going to show me as the student the version of the test that I've selected to run. It's going to let me hit OK or go back. In the scenario that I've created multiple versions on this test, it's going to also prompt the student to say, okay, well, what version are you writing? 1, 2, or 3? We've had it before where the student picks the wrong version number by accident, right? And they discover when they get to the end and they submit it and they get like 10% as their grade. If that sort of thing happens, once the entire exam is done, all the students are finished, it's really easy to go in and change the version number that student wrote and it'll regrade them. So it's a very easy thing to deal with. So I'm just going to hit OK. And it's going to sit here and say, please wait to start. So at this point, what you can actually do is you can tell all the students, okay, feel free to connect to the test so that everybody can start at the exact same time. And what you're going to see here on your participant list window are these little dots in the status column beside everybody's name. That tells you that those people are connected and waiting to start. As soon as you as the facilitator hit this little play button, what it's going to do is it's going to drop everybody into the test. So this now turns into a little play button telling you that they are in progress. Now on the student device, you'll see here that I've got my answer choices along the bottom here. And this looks exactly the same on this QT keypad as it does on the NXT. The little bubbles up here represent my question numbers, so I can see I've got 10. And as I answer my questions, what you'll see is just like on a Scantron card, the bubbles fill in, right? So as a student, I can identify what I've done and what I haven't done. All I need to do to go to my next question is hit my arrow key, and now I'm on question number 2. The keypad's going to automatically pick up the type of question. So if we switched question 3 to be like a short answer or a numeric response, it's going to automatically flip over to the text-based entry instead of numeric. So it's a smart device that way. Now, students have the ability to skip the question. So if they look at the paper copy and say, oh, you know what, I really don't know the answer to question 3, maybe something will jog my memory, I'll come back to it later. No problem at all. They can jump right over it and just carry on answering the rest of the questions. If it's a huge session and there's, say, 100 questions and they completely forget that they skipped question 3, when they get to the end of it on the device, it's going to tell them, hey, it's incomplete. Here's the questions that you missed, and it's going to let them go back and answer those questions now. Before our student submits it, they can also go back and review what they entered as their answer choices. Okay, so they can go back and forth. They can change their answers if they want. So if I wanted to change my answer to something else for number 1, I can just come back here and push my new choice. So it's just like we're doing a paper copy, it's just on the keypad. Now, from a facilitator's perspective, you actually have the ability on your screen to see real-time feedback. So right now you'll notice my version column says NA because there's just one version of the file that we're running. But what you can see here as far as individual progress goes is every single person that's currently writing the survey or the exam, and you can see in real time how they're doing. So you're going to get a check mark for getting it right and an X for getting it wrong, and it's going to tell you the overall progress. There's also the overall progress option that gives you the group average. So if we had 400 students writing an exam that was 100 questions, you're going to see on average out of 100, maybe they've answered 81.2 questions and what the average class grade is. If we had multiple versions, we're going to have a line for each version of the test so you can see those stats at a glance. So again, that's just meant as a resource for you as the facilitator or the instructor. So let me just, my document camera software does not seem to like being put into the background and then brought back. There we go. So let's just finish this. I'm going to go through and answer the rest of these questions so that you can see what happens when we finish. Question 7. Just putting some random answers in. I'm probably scoring terribly on this. Okay, so what it's going to do when it finishes is it's going to say complete. And now the student or participant has 2 options. The back arrow is going to let them go back and review the work that they did. So if they want to go double check stuff, they can. The envelope button here is going to let them submit the test. And the thing that I should make very clear is that once a test has been submitted from this keypad, a student cannot reconnect. So if they finish the test or the survey and then realize, oh man, I want to go back in there and change the answer to number 10, they cannot do that. Once it's submitted, it is finalized. Okay, they can't connect again. The trash button is going to delete what they've done from the keypad and let them start right over from the beginning. So in the event that they want to go back, because realistically that's what happens, right? Students want to go back and review their work. We go back and we can scroll through and double check everything. And now this is actually a source of confusion. A lot of people, once they're here, they have no idea how to submit the test. Okay, if you're using the NXT keypads, you're going to have a little button in the bottom corner here that has a wrench on it, and you just hit that button and it gives you an option to send your test. On the QT, you just hit the little wrench button here on the keypad, and then we're going to go to, let me just see here. We're going to go to exit test. It's going to give me the completion message saying you're complete. Again, if I missed anything, it's going to let me know. I'm going to hit my arrow because now we want to finalize this. And now what Turning Point does is it actually does like a double confirmation. So the student says, okay, I want to submit it, and it says send. And then it says saving. And then I'm going to get a little progress bar. Test received, and we're going to see on my presenter window here on my self-paced, I now get a check mark beside my name, letting you know that I'm finished, and the keypad just goes back to its home screen. Okay, and so that's what it's going to look like from your participation or participant's point of view. The nice thing from this overview panel here, and I actually experienced this with a large class that we did an exam with, there was 450 students, and everybody's kind of finishing up. And then towards the end of the window, there was like a handful of students still there. And Traditionally, with a paper copy of the test, you have no idea, are those students halfway done? Are they still, near the beginning? What are they doing? And so in that particular scenario, what we were actually able to do was down here in the bottom corner, you're able to see who's logged in and how many have completed it. But then you can go a step further, right? We can come into our individual progress screen and you can see everybody that's finished. And you can actually click the columns here to sort. So it'll sort everybody finished at the top, everybody still writing at the bottom. And so what we were able to do was come in here and sort the column, and out of the 450 students, we could see that the handful that were still there, we could see that they had answered all 150 questions. And so obviously at that point, it's just a matter of, okay, they're reviewing the work that they've done to make sure it's what they want to submit. So it's kind of nice because you can get that feedback to say, okay, like, are these students going to be another hour or are they close to being done? So you can kind of monitor that. Obviously, it also gives you that benefit of seeing, if a particular student or participant is struggling, if you know who that student is specifically in class, you can obviously, give them a hand or go and kind of pull them aside and talk to them if you need to. Okay, so that's basically how it's going to run. Now, what happens is when you're done, you're going to hit your stop polling button, and that button now turns into a save disk. So we're going to hit save. Just like anytime you save a session file, it's going to give it a name. Now, the nice thing that you'll notice here is that it gives it the same name as the question list name that I created. So if it was, Bio 101 final exam, by default, it's going to call it Bio 101 final exam, and it's going to date and timestamp it for you. Okay, so it automatically will come up with its naming convention, unlike PowerPoint polling, where it just calls it new session. Going to hit save, and we're done. So really, like you've noticed, all you have to worry about really is this left button in the top left corner here that now is back to saying accept logins. It's just clicking that button, setting your options, and you're done. From a reporting perspective, everything works exactly the same as it does in PowerPoint and Anywhere polling. So we can come into our Manage tab here. I use my March webinar plist, and so because I use that list, it automatically grouped my session with it. And so I can come in here and run all the same reports that I would normally run. Now, because this was just a self-paced as a testing example, I just have everything as enter your question text. So this gives you an idea how generic it is if you just tell it your correct answers. And so really in this type of setting, we're not necessarily worried about what the question and answers were. We're worried about how people scored. So you can come into things like results detail, right? And it will show you each person and how they answered and what their score was and all that good stuff, right? So this is more the overview that we're looking at when we just tell it what the correct answer is. You can also come into results by participant. And again, just like any other session you've saved, it's going to group all the results by each individual participant and how those people answered all those questions. So same sort of thing from there. I mean, you can print, export. If you're using any of the great LMS integrations that Turning Point has built into it, you can export stuff to, Blackboard, Moodle, Sakai, Desire to Learn, any of those guys, and it'll match it all up to your students and upload it right into the gradebook so that they can see it immediately. So it makes it very easy to do all those sorts of things. Okay, now in terms of the self-paced polling, that is basically all there is to it. So it's a very easy process. Obviously, we didn't need to take the full hour for this webinar to do that. So basically, in a nutshell, just to recap, you're going to create a participant list if it's applicable. You're going to create your question list. When you create that question list, you're either going to leave it as just your generic answer and question options and then plug in what the correct answer choices are, or you're going to put in that full detail of your questions and all your answer choices. You're going to load those two pieces of information, and then we're just going to use our top left corner button here just to walk through the steps of starting and stopping and saving the results that we collect. Okay, so that is self-paced, not anywhere polling, self-paced polling in a nutshell. What we'll do, because we finished up here early, I know there's a bunch of people on the line here. If you have any questions at this point, please feel free to submit them either through the QA or through the chat. And I'll stick around for a little bit until I see the room kind of start to empty out. I'll stick around and answer any of those that come through. Otherwise, that is self-paced polling and how it's going to work and a few ways you can use it. I hope everybody found that useful. Again, there's all my contact information on the screen. So if you do have any questions following the webinar or going forward using this functionality in Turning Point, please feel free to absolutely reach out to me at any time, and I'm always more than happy to help out. Again, this session was recorded, so what I'll do is after the recording's been processed, I will send a copy out to everybody that was registered and everybody that was in attendance today, along with a couple PDF resources and some links to some different areas of our website. So again, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out. With that said, I'll let everybody get back to their days. And again, any questions that you have, please submit them through the chat or QA function at this time, and I'll stick around for a little bit. Thank you very much.